So again, I'm Valentina Petrus. I'm working for Open Society Foundation, and it was my task to moderate the first group. It was about the decade in time. In fact, I will follow my notes together with you because it was not really enough time to prepare a very short summary after the lunch. So very briefly, the debate starters in our group were Mr. Detlef Boeing from the DG Enlargement of the European Commission and Adriatic Hasantari, the director of Roma Active from Albania. And we tried to follow, it is too much to say, to offer answer for which question listed by the organizers, but we try to follow the main ideas, and we discuss in a very honest and open way the topic, if the decade, what about the decade in time, and which are our own experiences. Mr. Detlef mentioned that the decade, if the decade provided, we are talking about the fact that decade provided sufficient time to tackle this very complex topic. But what means, in fact, sufficient time? It was really very clear from the beginning that a decade, it is not enough in order to solve centuries of injustice, and in order to minimize the huge gap which is between the situation of Roma around across Europe and non-Roma population. We still do need to have to develop continuous efforts and to continue this work. And maybe it would be good also to think a bit, to reflect on the purpose for the future, which is the scope, which should be the real purpose. And I would like to mention here that it was really also for us very difficult to do not step in the other two topics, decade in scope, decade into area, because they are very connected. So that's the reason that from time to time we are talking also about the main scope for the future efforts. I don't want to say that for the future decade, but we know that we are talking about a format of continuing our efforts. Adriatic mentioned also that maybe is the right time to look back, and all actors involved in this international initiative to reflect what has been done in each countries. And it is very clear that the main scope of the decade, as has been declared and its launch in 2005, to reduce the gap between Roma and non-Roma, has not been achieved yet. Didn't happen despite the institutional framework, despite the strategies and policies in place, despite of the fact that many actors are involved in this process. Maybe we should reevaluate also the main duties, responsibilities of these actors. And of course, to accept our own responsibilities and to move things forward. Then also not talking only about the scope, the main goal, but also you remember that we said years ago that Roma participation is the core value of the decade. Also, this didn't happen yet. Roma are not well represented. Roma are not participating enough. And maybe also this is another moment when we should stop and reevaluate what means in this moment Roma participation within the decade. Then we have several thoughts about synchronizing the decade with the EU framework strategies up to 2020. And on the end, we conclude that maybe it's not enough 20 years, maybe it's not enough 5 years, or I don't know how many years, but what it is very important in this moment is the fact that we should continue our efforts, that the decade it was just the start, setting up the structure, and maybe we should continue our efforts as long as are needed for achieving our main goals, and this is reducing the gap between Roma and non-Roma, and the inclusion of Roma. Thank you.
Rezultati rada druge radne skupine predstavit će.
The results of the second group will be presented by Mr. Andor Ürmös.
Try to be really very brief. However, we made, I think, a tremendous work, and thank you very much for the participants, because in spite of the really very limited time, we have identified some concrete measures, and I would like to share with you right now these concrete measures. First of all, we had two presentations, one by Jaroslav Kling from the UNDP and the other one from Bernard Roth from the OSI. And the first presentation, OSF, I'm sorry. And the first presentation was focusing on the UNDP study, the two UNDP studies which were made in 2004 and 2011. And Jaroslav actually pointed out what are the main differences between these two studies and what are the achievements, if there is any. And the situation is a bit sad, because he said in his presentation that there's only one area where we can see a real progress, is the education. We went through all of the thematic areas of the decade, like housing, health, employment, but in the other areas there are actually some gaps still to be filled, and there are some shortages which we should take into the consideration in the future very, very much. Surprisingly, he said that in education some progress has been made in countries like Bulgaria, Romania and Serbia in the primary education and also in the lower secondary education. Surprisingly, it means for me just that well, looking at the other findings, actually in Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, there are some changes as well, but that was the findings of the UNDP study. The other part of the coin is employment. While in this thematic area, actually, the situation is really very sad, because there are some figures which are showing some decrease of employment. Actually, and people who are not in training, not in education, the number of people who are in this category is really increased, almost in all countries. So, I mean, this is where we have to do very quickly something. Bernard Roth was pointing out actually the shortcomings of the decade, and he was focusing on the main objective of the decade, how it has been met by the action plans, by the measures, as the original aim was to close the gap by 2015 between Roma and non-Roma. We have to state that this gap still exists, and probably by 2015 it still will exist. But the main point was that there are some areas where we have to be much more focused. I just give you some hints, like for example the data collection, the segregation in education, in general in employment, the policy mechanism, the gender perspective, and of course the most important, probably the most important thing, is the discrimination and strengthening movements of extreme right-wing parties and paramilitary groups in Europe. He emphasized that the European Commission has taken up actually let's say the results and the achievements of the decade, and Commissioner Reding made some promising statements that the European framework for national Roma integration strategy should achieve some tangible results, earmark money, and beyond the papers we have to implement actually these measures. The discussion after the two presentations was really very lively, and we had some concrete measures, and probably I will forget some, so sorry for that, but probably we won't have time to discuss all the concrete suggestions, but I've tried to highlight the most important ones. The first thing which was very much emphasized is the policy mechanism. As we don't see the real coordination on the national level, the cooperation between the line ministries, and actually there was another statement that even if we have the action plans or right now the national Roma integration strategies, sometimes these strategies, they are contradicting the mainstream policies. There was a case about education, what to do in this situation, how to reinforce the policy mechanisms to avoid such situations in the future. There was also a statement about the policy mechanism that, of course, we have to find a way to mainstream the Roma-related measures, but on the other hand, we have to be very careful not to be trapped in the mainstream policies when we are talking about poverty reduction, and we are doing a lot in poverty reduction, but all the developments, all the infrastructural developments, let's say that, are stopped just at the edge of the Roma ghetto. So what to do in this situation when the poverty reduction strategy is not really tailor-made to the Roma inclusion. The second point was is the discrimination, as we are not really focusing on the majority of the population. We are just trying to focus as much as possible. Some people, they said even the 95, 99%, we are focusing on Roma communities and not really focusing on the majority. And to build a bridge between the Roma and non-Roma communities, that could be something what we can do in the next decade period. Of course, the complex manner, the comprehensive way of doing something was mentioned many times, as line ministers, they are doing some important measures, but these measures are absolutely not harmonized with each other. Of course, there was a point about the local level, that how to reinforce the local level, how to make a shift from the national level to the local level, and how the mayors, they could do more. Of course, we understand the situations that, and we understand that mayors, they are very much related to the political votes. So if they are doing too much for Roma, they could not be re-elected. But even in this situation, we have to find a way to commit the mayors and the municipal level. There was one concrete proposal to launch a network of local municipalities, local authorities. And this initiative was actually already launched by the Council of Europe and other organizations, but there will be a conference on the 11th and 12th of October organized by the European Commission and Open Society Institute, or Open Society Foundation, sorry. And it will be actually a launch of the network of mayors. One more point, monitoring and evaluation and data collection. I remember since the decade has been launched, we are discussing this question, and we have several pro and contra arguments about the data collection, the Roma-related data collection, but everybody very sure that we have to make some efforts to gather some data, Roma-related data, and to monitor the progress. What has been done, what are the results, and what has been not done, and what kind of problems we are still facing. And I would like to conclude with the political will, because everybody was mentioning the political will as one of the most important questions. And there was a very specific and tricky question how to reinforce the political will and how to make the political will. And I have to tell you that, of course, there is no kind of simple solution for that, but everybody said that without a political will, we can introduce measures, even very good measures, some policy measures, but if there is no political will, it will not be implemented. Thank you very much.
Hvala I zadnju skupinu će...
Thank you, and the last group will be presented by Mr. Kalman Misei.
friends how long my friend Andor Ürmös is able to speak about one session. Mine, I think, is going to be a shorter summary. My task was, or our task was, in the third breakout session to try to map out the geography, the geographic extension of what is going to follow the Roma decade. And the two discussants who led up the debate were Madam Saliha Dujeria, Assistant Minister in the Ministry of Human Rights and Refugees in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Katarina Maternova from the World Bank with a big European Commission background, as we all know. I have to say that there was some methodological confusion, so relatively less discussion happened about geography, but important discussion. First of all, it was drawn to our attention that since the 2003 meeting in Budapest that had launched the decade, important things happened, namely 5 countries with large Roma population joined the European Union with major consequences to their Roma policies and potential funding for Roma policies, as well as the European Union's cumulatively increased interest in the issue of Roma social inclusion that culminated in the framework document in the first half of last year. Now, not all is good about this. It was said, first of all, it was easier to discuss the Roma issue with candidate countries, accession countries, than with member states. It was asserted. So in a way, countries got off the hook after joining the European Union, and their attention to the Roma sometimes even decreased, it has been stated. Nevertheless, since the European Union has been involved so strongly, this is one of the major factors that has to determine our thinking about the future after 2015, because inevitably, the European Union being a strong institution, or the Commission itself, the new member states will pay more attention to the European Union, to the European Commission than to the decade. How to attract the new member states, it was asked, and the tentative answer was to make the decade process and the decade meetings more policy relevant to those policymakers in the new member states. It was also said that undoubtedly Croatia will feel the same way after it joins the European Union. So one of the, although it's not a geographic issue, but an issue that I would like to put on the table, and Katarina has arrived, whose suggestion it has been, to make the meetings more policy relevant, obviously with narrower policy subjects, so that people who are present here can take back important policy lessons. Undoubtedly, for the Western Balkan countries, a framework such as the decade now is going to remain very relevant, because their joining the European Union is going to be inevitably a long process, given the internal problems of the European Union and some of the experiences with the new member states. Therefore, the process is going to remain relevant. Some of the participants from the Western Balkan countries emphasized the problem of the decade process lacking money, spendable money on concrete Roma issues projects. How to cope with this, I think here again, the possibility has to be found somehow in the relationship of the post-decade framework with the European Commission. Examples have been used that illustrate that where money is involved, the cooperation and the process is much more meaningful and interesting. In terms of the geographic expansion, it has been said that it is very much in the interest of the process to have large countries with large Roma populations, such as Turkey, such as Ukraine, Russia, and also Moldova, who are first represented in an observer status here, that they join the process and enrich the dialogue between the countries as well as the civil society represented here. And finally, in terms of the West European countries, how can they be attracted to the process? The suggestion was made that particularly those countries, first of all, Spain was mentioned as a very active and very, very positive member of the decade, but also that some other West European countries can be attracted through the immigration process, that where Roma immigration is, these countries need to be engaged in a dialogue for which the decade is providing a useful framework. Thank you.
Hvala Kalmanu. Kao što smo čuli, ovo je tek početak procesa za kojeg očekujemo da će kulminirati do kraja našeg predsjedanja desetljećem. A sada ćemo čuti izjavu gospodina Branka Sučanca, ravnatelja Ureda za ljudska prava i prava nacionalnih manjina.
I will say hvala as Kalman just said. Thank you. I will be very brief since we are really out of time. So we are just half an hour or maybe more. Actually, this discussion about the future of Roma decade reminds me on, this well-known and popular story about the pessimist and optimist, whether the half glass of water is full or empty, it depends the angle from which you are looking to it. We have started yesterday with one innovative approach during the International Steering Committee meeting. All of you who were present last night, last evening, you know how and what we have been discussing about the future of the decade, who was yes, who was no, and so on and so on. But I will now very briefly present to you our decade presidency plan for regarding this future of the decade. Our objective is to explore and assess options for the decade and present feasible plan, I would say, in form of policy paper at the next International Steering Committee to be held somewhere in Croatia. I don't know still yet, maybe in Zagreb, but maybe somewhere else. We know that the decade of Roma inclusion is coming to an end of its originally defined term. The decade initiated crucially important processes for Roma integration in Europe and provided the impetus for the EU-led effort covering similar subject matter, that is to say, EU framework for national Roma integration strategies. After 7 years, now we are in an 8th year, it is clear that Roma integration has not been completed, despite the fact that it has reached higher attention by a number of key policymakers. The decade aimed to eliminate discrimination against Roma and close the unacceptable gap between Roma and the rest of society, and it is still present as the gap remains and in some cases, of course, appears to be growing as we see all around Europe. Approaching the end of the decade term, it is necessary to explore and assess options for the decade after 2015. Opening the topic of the future of the decade after 2015 during the Croatian presidency of the decade is timely, bearing in mind that any option that might be agreed by the International Steering Committee would need a preparation period. Moreover, Croatia's accession to the European Union during our presidency is another important factor for discussion of the decade future because of Croatia's role to be a bridge or the bridge Roma integration policies of EU and non-EU countries involved in the decade, as well as the decade and the EU policy on Roma integration. You know, geography is how the American will say, goddamn thing, you know, you cannot run away from the from the regions where you belong. So we are not running away from our region, we are here. We are here to help all the countries in the region, in the rest of the Southeast Europe. We like to call Southeast Europe, not Balkan region, but anyway, you can call it as you like, as you wish. So, the first thing is stock taking, of course, to see where we are, what we have, what kind of success we have, and of course, what more needs to be done. Relation between EU and decade, EU framework and all national action plans. As we heard, decade expansions, and I again welcome here two representatives of Moldova and Turkey here. And of course, several times we heard today political will of the participating countries. Croatia, as a president country, will lead a discussion throughout the year. And we will go soon with sort of policy paper, which we will present very soon. And we will also propose to set up decade future policy group, which will be no more than 10. I would like less than 10 people, but we would like to have fair distribution of the people who will be part of this group. I'm coming back to my proposal 2 years ago in Prague during Czech presidency where I suggested to have sort of troika, but some of you don't like this term troika because it reminds them of maybe some bad things in the past, you know. But anyway, we would like to have one country from the EU, one country from non-EU, and one country who is somewhere in between. It means Croatia as a president, of course. Then, of course, there are a number of other stakeholders like Council of Europe, OSCE, Open Society. Of course, definitely the Decade Secretariat is by default included in this whole issue, in this whole business, since we expect from them to be very helpful and to assist the Croatian presidency throughout the year. Very soon, again, we will go with all the features of all this process, and of course, most of the things, or all of the things, will be posted at the Decade Secretariat website. You can also have access by the Facebook social group, especially for young people, but not only for young people, even for Kalman and myself, of course, who can also tick like. So this would be a very, and you see, very ambitious plan from our side, but again, we expect from you to be helpful in this process, and we believe that by the end of our presidency, it means that during the 24th International Steering Committee meeting, we will have a policy paper which might be adopted at that time. I will stop here, and of course, I wish all of us luck for next period. Thank you.